Welcome to episode 52 of the Filmumentaries podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you're a regular, welcome back. And if you support the podcast on patreon.com/Jamie Benning, then may you live forever. So this is not a typical episode. While I do have a guest, he doesn't work in the film industry. He is, however, a big fan of Star Wars, like me, and who, like me, enjoys channeling his love for these films into something creative. Justin Berger is the author of The Empire Strikes Back, Unauthorized Timeline, 1975 to 2020. It's a reference book that catalogues all the major and minor dates surrounding the inception, pre-production, production, and the aftermath of The Empire Strikes Back. During this episode, Justin and I have an announcement. The thumbnail to this episode, of course, is a big hint, but I won't say any more now. So here's my chat with Justin Berger, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Okay, so we've got Justin Berger here. Justin, tell me about yourself. You're obviously a Star Wars fan. Where do you come from? What's your kind of background in your love of Star Wars?
I am in the United States, in Washington State, and I've loved Star Wars as long as I can remember. I mean, when I was a little kid, my first memory is sitting on the carpet watching my parents' TV and seeing the Star Wars trailer come on. And most vividly, this still sticks in my mind, is Luke Skywalker coming into Princess Leia's cell and saying, "I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you." And that just always stuck in my head. And that really captivated me as a kid. And I was probably like 4 or 5 years old. Like, I was pretty young. And that ages me, but it's fine.
What year?
um,
What year were you born then? Because I think there's quite.
I was born in 75. So Star Wars came out in 77.
Uh-huh.
I probably saw, I mean, who knows when I saw that commercial, because it could have been like a re-release or something, like 78, 79. It was definitely before Empire. So I think I was probably like 4 years old, maybe, when that commercial hit TV, and at least when I remember seeing it. And it just always stuck with me, and it was just like, I can't even describe it. It's just, and it still resonates in my head to this day. It was just very profound thing of him coming in to rescue the princess, and just, the music and the swelling of the music. And it was something that I had never experienced. Even I was 4, but still, it was such an experience just seeing the trailer on TV, that it just stuck with me. And then after that, my parents would, bought me Star Wars toys. And then I did not see Empire in the theater, because I think I was too young, and my parents didn't want to deal with taking a small child into a theater or whatever. But I did see Return of the Jedi in the theater. That was my first Star Wars film that I remember seeing in the movie theater. And that was pretty profound. That was a big deal, because I would have been 8. Yeah, 8 years old. Saw Return of the Jedi. And then after that, my love of Star Wars was pretty evident. And then it kind of waned away as I got older. And then it was always a part of my life. But, as you grow up as a kid, you kind of, oh, those are childhood things. You don't need that in your life. And, girls aren't going to date a guy who has toys and all that crap. So as I got in my 20s, I just kind of, it was still part of my life. I mean, the prequels came out, and the special editions, and then the prequels. So that whole time, everybody's excited about it. I was excited about it, because I'd never seen the first 2 films on the big screen. And so that kind of reinvigorated my love of Star Wars. But then I saw the prequels, and I was like, oh. And I was not a fan of the prequels. I don't hate the prequels, but I just don't think they're the best Star Wars.
Yeah.
And after Revenge of the Sith, I thought, okay, Star Wars is done. I was like, that's the last movie we're ever going to get. George Lucas did what he set out to do, and we're good. We're done. And I thought that's all Star Wars is going to be for the rest of my life. And then Disney buys Star Wars, and then all of a sudden, it's just everything explodes again. And then I started collecting Star Wars toys again at that point for some weird reason. Well, it's not weird reason, but a lot
It
of
pulled you back
nostalgia.
in, didn't it? Yeah, it
It
does.
really
It
did.
does have that habit of doing. And you know what you've just described there is very similar to my kind of arc of Star Wars in my life. I was born in '76, so Star Wars has always been in my life, in my conscious life, and I don't remember a time when it wasn't there. And I remember those commercials for the movies, and I particularly remember Return of the Jedi as well. I went for my birthday up in London to the big screen, and remember going to Hamley's toy store and getting toys. And there's a photo of me just with these big bags of, I don't know I think it was like an AT-AT and Snowspeeder
Yeah.
and some of the
Wow.
new figures and things. And it's funny, isn't it? I had a similar thing, 99 or 97, the re-release. Took all my friends saying, we've got to see this on the big screen. And then 99, the prequels, and I kind of was like, oh, okay, this is over for me. But it does have a way of sort of pulling you back in, doesn't it? And
Yeah,
sort of there's certainly enough going on in the Star Wars world these days to engage fans.
for sure. Yeah, and it was coming back into it. It was like revisiting an old friend to,
Yes.
for a cheesy soliloquy or colloquialism, I should say. But
Mm.
it was just, it was like I found that childhood magic, to be corny. And, I started collecting all the toys that I had and the ones I didn't, the ones I always wanted. Like I never had an AT-AT, and I bought an AT-AT and I was just like, oh, this is amazing. And it just really reinvigorated everything. And I joined some Facebook groups for collectors, and then it opened up a whole new world to me of Star Wars. And then that kind of led me to the Empire Strikes Back book that I did. And that was actually a very organic process of doing
Mm.
that book, because
What was the initial spark though for that? Because I mean, there are fans, of course, there are millions of fans, Star Wars fans around the
yeah.
world, but there are a certain number of fans that have actually gone and created something, been inspired to create something, and you were inspired to create this Empire timeline. But what was the kind of
Yeah.
seed of that idea?
I mean, basically I was on Facebook and I'm in all these groups, and fans, God bless them, have all of this stuff saved from films. And we're all archivists in a sense. We collect and try to preserve as much of this stuff as we can, just almost as much as Lucasfilm does. And it's just, I would see people post like call sheets and all these specific dates to Empire Strikes Back, and I mean the other movies too, but Empire's always been my favorite. So I would just see all these very specific dates about, this was shot exactly on this day, and this happened on this day, and this contract was signed on this day. And it's like all these dates started coming in. And so I just kind of had this idea. I was like, well, nobody's really put together a timeline. Like they've done the timeline of like, this is the Star Wars timeline of when all the stories happened in the Star Wars universe type thing. But nobody had really put a timeline together. I mean, there were some books that touched on it, but I really wanted to encompass everything I could, from the early inception of Empire Strikes Back all the way up to, at the time, which was going to be the 40th anniversary, which was interesting because at the time that I was thinking of the book, the 40th anniversary wasn't even on my radar. Like I didn't even realize the 40th was coming up. And then I started the book, and then as I'm doing the book, all of a sudden, all the 40th anniversary, buzz starts, and I'm like, oh, geez, like I can incorporate this with the 40th. And then I ended up releasing it, in the 40th in 2020 for the 40th anniversary, which was not planned, but it was a kismet situation that allowed
Mm-hmm.
me to kind of take advantage of it. And so I just started collecting dates, and I did about a year's worth of research. And I asked people that I had met through these groups. There were collectors that had stuff, and I would ask them, hey, can I get pictures of those documents you have that have the dates? And I would go to books like, Rinsler's book, and then Alan Arnold's book, and just anywhere I could find a date that had anything to do with Empire Strikes Back. And if you look through the book, I mean, there's really obscure stuff that is just like nobody probably cares about except me and like a handful of fans.
The
But
completist in you, yeah.
yeah, it really was. And I still find dates now, and I'm like, oh, I want to put that in my book as like a revised edition. But it's like, when do you stop? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like it
yeah.
gets to a point where you kind of have to be like, it has to sit as its own thing, and I can't just keep adding to it. I mean, I could, but
So
I have to live my life.
give us an example of like some of the different kinds of dates that you would mention in the Empire book.
I mean, everything from major dates like the production schedule as far as like, what dates they shot specific scenes,
Mm.
um, dates, and sometimes dates weren't exactly like, I didn't have, this is the day, month, year that this happened. It was more like, this is the quarter that this happened, like especially with the promotional stuff. Like they didn't really do specific dates. It was like first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. So I would do things like, May of 1979, or sorry, 1980. Plato releases this thing or whatever. And so it was like, I tried to get as close as I could to specific dates, but sometimes it's lost to time and you just don't
Mm.
know exactly when that came out. But a lot of it was promotional toys and stuff where you're kind of ballparking it. But you'd have stuff like that. You'd have stuff like, um, I mean, all the way up to the special editions, when the special editions came out, when specific shots were done at ILM, when people did voiceover work, stuff like that. When books came out, specific books.
Mm-hmm.
I include Splinter of the Mind's Eye because that was originally the sequel to
Mm.
Star
Mm.
Wars. So I thought it deserved a place. So I kind of talk about Splinter as well, since I feel like it has a connection to Empire, just the fact that it was going to be the sequel. Um, and then it leads all the way up to like 40th anniversary releases, and there was a string of concerts that were going, well, before COVID happened. There were all these concerts scheduled to do screenings of Empire Strikes Back, with a live orchestra doing the soundtrack, and
Mm-hmm.
they did this all over the world, and so there were all these dates. So I included those, and then half of those dates ended up getting canceled because of COVID, and so I had to kind of go back and do a revision on that. But anyway, it runs the gamut of, um, everything Empire. Basically is what I tried to do. If it was connected even on a small level to Empire Strikes Back, I would put it in the book.
Mm.
Like, there was a screening of all three films through Starlog magazine. I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but it was the first time all three films had been screened in the United States, I believe. I'm pretty sure
Mm.
it was. It was like a 10th anniversary thing, stuff like that. And it's like, it's related to Empire. It's not specific to Empire, but obviously the film's included. So stuff like that. And it really just is across the board. Promotional appearances, books, comic books, toys, just anything and everything that was Empire related. So if you flip through that book, like you're just flipping through year by year.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, some years will have like a couple, like 2 3 entries, and then other like later dates when things started picking up, you're gonna have like, 100 entries easy.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've found in my, in doing my podcast that some of the people I speak to, they kind of thank me in the end of the conversation because they say, we're really not good at recording our history in the film industry. And it's important that people
yeah,
like you are doing this. And, I take that, as it's intended. And really your book does the same thing, because I'm sure even Lucasfilm or Disney themselves don't have any sort of collation of all this information in one easily accessible place. So for fans, for documentary makers, for people writing articles, this is a great reference book to be able to pull off the shelf and say, when did that happen, and when was
yeah,
this promotional photo taken in London, for instance, the Empire Day stuff they did. So I think
yeah.
that's really valuable. What was the response like from the fans online?
I mean, it was nothing but positive. I mean,
Mm.
it wasn't like gangbusters. I mean, I didn't sell a million books or anything like that, which if I did, Lucasfilm would probably be knocking on my door. But it was a very low key thing. I mean, I had, maybe when I first announced it, I mean, there was a lot of excitement, and I had a lot of friends in the community and a lot of people, who were interested in the book, obviously. And I think, and I wasn't doing it for the money. Like, that had nothing to do with my reason for doing it. Like, I didn't really care how many I sold. Honestly, I did it for me. Like, I just
Yeah.
wanted to encapsulate that and have my own book of it. So, and just have that feeling of like, I did this,
Mm.
and I wasn't really interested in making a ton of money off it. I never intended to make money, but it's definitely something I did for fans and for myself.
Yeah.
And everybody seemed to, I mean, I think I had one Amazon reviewer that said, oh, the cover's in full color, but all the interior pictures are black and white. This sucks. And I'm just like, dude,
Welcome to self-publishing. Yeah.
I know, right? And the interesting thing is I had to do it in black and white because it was just cost prohibitive to
Yes.
do it in color. And I looked at a bunch of different publishers, and the prices were just ridiculous. And I was like, how does anybody make books? I mean, I guess when you're printing out thousands and thousands and thousands, it reduces the
Mm,
rate of the book. But for somebody like me, it was like if I were to sell, and I actually did sell a full color version of the book. I call it the collector's edition,
mm,
which was an homage to the Empire Strikes Back collector's edition souvenir magazine
mm-hmm,
they gave away at the movies at the theater.
mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to do a special version just for fun, just because it when I was making the book, everything was in full color, and so it looked great, but I couldn't release that. So I was like, oh, it kind of killed me. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a limited run. It's going to be really expensive. If anybody wants it, they can have it. But I did a limited run where I did the collector's edition. I think I sold it for like 6 months, and then it was done. But that was like a $60 book, and I was just like, if anybody wants it, great. I'm not really. I just want it personally, and so I did that. But it isn't black and white because it's just cost prohibitive to do color
Yeah.
photos.
And just to
So
say as well, it's on Amazon as a self-published, because I guess, the as you say, cost prohibitive otherwise. So what happens here is if somebody buys it, Amazon print it and they send it on to the address that
yep,
they've supplied, and it's nice and simple. So fast forward to this year, I was enjoying putting some tweets out around the time that the Boba Fett series, because we're revisiting Jabba's palace, we're revisiting some of the Tatooine locations from Return of the Jedi. And I started to think, God, yes, it's 40 years next year. So I was doing some tweets about, it was, I don't know, 40 years ago that they started shooting this, or, it was 40 years ago this week that they tested the Ewok costumes. And I was getting quite into putting these dates online, getting some good responses. And I was thinking, there should be a book like this. And I thought, hang on, there was that Justin Berger guy who did one for Empire.
yeah,
Maybe we should have a chat about doing one for Return of the Jedi. So that's what I did, didn't I? I got in touch with you and put it to
yeah,
you. And it was obviously on your radar already. But I also felt that maybe with the interviews that I've done, that we could certainly get some more information off people that worked
yeah,
on the movies, such as call sheets and other things that went on, and maybe kind of sometimes flesh out some of the dates where we can leave a little anecdote, not too much in the Rinsler style. We're not writing a full book here, it's still a reference book. But
yeah.
I was keen to get involved, and we've happy to announce, you go ahead.
Yeah, this is our big announcement. So basically, we are doing the Return of the Jedi Unauthorized Timeline, and we've been working on it now for a few months and compiling dates and everything, and we still have a ways to go.
Mm-hmm.
But it's exciting because, to be honest, I was on the fence about wanting to do another timeline book because it was a lot of work.
Mm.
And with Empire, it was labor of love because I love that movie more than anything. And I love Jedi, but not as much. Like that movie doesn't have the same impact on me. So I was a little on the fence. And then when you approached me, I was like, okay, I can have somebody else to help kind of carry the load on this. So it's not just me. And I love what you're doing with your podcast and what you've done with the Filmumentaries, the
Thanks.
videos and everything. And it's like, because I had watched your videos a while ago and I was like, wow, he's doing exactly what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
When you did some of your videos like Empire Strikes Back, I think you did what was like you would play the movie and then have like behind the scenes stuff
Yeah,
throughout.
yeah.
Which to me is, I actually had that idea and I was like, I was going to do something very similar, and then I saw yours and I was like, well, I don't have to do it now because he's doing it way better than I would have even done it. But so your stuff, you've been on my radar for a long time, and I've just really been like, okay, he's doing the stuff that needs to be done, which is preserving that history of these movies, which is great. And so when you approached me, it was like a perfect marriage, I thought, of
Mm-hmm.
two fans who are already doing similar things separately, coming together to do this book. And I thought it was perfect. And then, you started your podcast and you've been interviewing all these people from ILM and just getting all this really great insider information that nobody's heard before, which is awesome.
Cool. That's
And
good to
that
hear.
really
Thank you.
adds a lot. Yeah, no, and I see online like there's so many people who are appreciative of what you're doing, and it's great, man.
That's cool.
And
Yeah.
to be working with you, honestly, is pretty awesome. Like I feel like it ups me a level to have you on
Well,
board.
I don't know about that.
Um,
I don't know about that. I think you did a very good job on that book. And I just, I've always had, like you, I love Empire Strikes Back the most, I guess, my favorite film ever. But I have an affection for Return of the Jedi because of, as I said, my 7th birthday screening. And my daughter, who's 7, is attracted to the Return of the Jedi toys the most. When we get my old toys out, she loves those kind of characters and everything. So there's a bit of love going on in the Benning household for Return of the Jedi. And one of the other things that we've done with this, and we're going to continue to do, is build upon what you've already done on the Empire book, and kind of, I wanted to bring a friend of mine in on it as well. There's a friend of mine, Pete Starling, who, if you have followed my Filmumentaries, listeners, you will have seen the Inside Jaws poster. You'll have seen a couple of versions of that. You'll have seen the Raiding of the Lost Ark poster, which my friend Pete Starling created for me. And Pete is my kind of, I regard him as my creative consultant. I run things by him all the time. We go for a walk or for a bike ride and have a chat. And we've brought him on to do the cover for this book. So again, wanting to make the next step up, we're kind of, bringing somebody on board who's got a more of an aesthetic eye than I think myself or you have.
Yeah, for sure.
And a capability to do it. And Pete's been sending drafts to us over the last few weeks or so, and it's looking really good, actually.
There's a sneak peek. I don't know if you can see that, but
Yeah.
I got the cover here that he's working on, and it's just, it has been great. Like, he gave us the first draft and I was like, that's really good. And I was, there's little tweaks here and there, but I was just, because I had done the original cover and, I did everything on the other book, and it's nice to have other people contributing to this book and to not just be all me and, doing everything. People can give their own input and their own perspective on the film and on the creative aspect of it. So it really broadens it and makes it a better book, in my opinion. And Pete's doing an amazing job. Like, we're not 100% there yet, but we're pretty darn close. You're probably, well, when this comes out, I am pretty sure you're going to see it online, find at least the cover of what the book is going to be. So it's been, we're not done yet, but I feel like we've got a considerable chunk of the book there to where, it feels like it's becoming something. It's not just an idea like, hey, let's do a book. It actually, there's a concrete, realness to it, where it feels like, wow, okay, this is something. And we still have a year to finish it. We're going to put it out next year on the anniversary of Return of the Jedi, which is obviously appropriate. It'll be the 40th anniversary. So we do have some time to finish it, but it's coming together quickly. What's interesting, and this happened with me on Empire, is you'll run across dates where there's conflicting information out there, where one person will say, well, this happened on this date, and then a book will say, well, this happened on this date, and an actor will say, well, that happened on that date. So it's like you have all these competing things, and you really have to sift through and try to find out what the truth is, which is what I really tried to do on my book, and I want to do on this book, is really be as close to reality as possible, not just somebody's memory of something, but try to find the actual fact of dates and what happened when. Because I know there was Rensler's book, one of the big controversies that he had for his Empire book was Marjorie Eaton not playing the Emperor, and that it was Rick Baker's wife who actually did it. And then I put that in my book, and then I found out later, after the book had come out, that wasn't true. And Rick Baker actually came out and said, my wife was never on there. Like, she was never even on set. And everybody's like, oh, what the heck? And then, so it was Marjorie Eaton. And then I had to do a revised version of my book and change that. But it's just, and Rensler was like, that's kind of, he talked with Lucas, he talked with all these people. So he was kind of like the authority on all these making up books. But then you realize even he made mistakes, and it's not his fault. There's so much conflicting information. And as time went on, Lucas was a revisionist of history himself. And he would kind of change things as time went on to, for whatever. I don't want to,
memory is an interesting thing, though, isn't it? Like that whole Emperor thing, it might have been that Rick said, I'll get my wife to do it, and that was the last George heard of it, and he assumed the person who did it was his wife. I mean, who knows how it happened? I mean, I can't even remember. Sure. I mean, I work on big TV gigs. I can't remember a lot of it, and I'm sure a lot of the documentation that claims we did certain things at certain times wouldn't be true, because on a film like Return of the Jedi, for instance, we found in some of the books, there'll be the schedule, but the schedule isn't necessarily stuck to, because maybe they overran one day and it knocks things along. And other days, of course, you might have multiple things going on one day. They might be testing the Ewok costumes whilst scouting a location, whilst doing something else. So Yeah, it's interesting sifting through all this stuff, isn't it? Because some of the work is kind of detective work in a way.
Yeah,
And I
totally.
think both of us enjoy that aspect. I certainly enjoyed that doing my filmumentaries, trying to sift through the truths and the untruths to try and get something at least as accurate as you can be.
Yeah, and fans are very adamant and hardcore about it too, because you'll have fans who will kind of get mad at you if you get something wrong. They're like, that's not true, and they get really upset about it, and you're just like, okay, man, calm down. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Like some fans just are so adamant about things, and I get it. It's something close to their hearts, but we're all just doing our best to preserve history.
Yeah.
And history is very elusive in some instances, and people pass away, and all that, their memories are gone.
Hmm.
And that was another reason I wanted to do the original book, is like, people are getting older, people are dying, and all of their history and their knowledge of these films is dying with them. And so I wanted to preserve kind of a snapshot of, at least now, of as much information as possible, because eventually a lot of this little nuanced info is just going to go away because nobody will remember it. So
Hmm.
that was part of one of the reasons I wanted to do my book as well, was just being able to preserve that history. And I think we're continuing that tradition with this Return of the Jedi book, especially with the interviews you've done with everybody, from
Hmm.
Michael Pangrazio to I can't even think of all the people.
Craig Barron, Nilo Rodis,
Yeah,
Jimmy Hero. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And these are obscure people who, not obscure in their fields, but as far as like who fans know of,
Hmm.
they're not Mark Hamill, they're not George Lucas, they're not Gary Kurtz. Like, these are people who are in the trenches doing the dirty work to make sure
Hmm.
that these films were completed and looked great, and they have the juicy details because they were there. And obviously some of them aren't going to remember because it's like, well, that was 40 years ago. But it's good to have that resource and to pick their brains, and kind of, like you said, it's detective work. So you take a little bit what they said and a little about what's in the book or whatever somebody else has written, and you kind of meet in the middle and be like, okay,
Yes.
well, this makes sense that it happened at this time, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? So, and that's an interesting journey. Sometimes it makes you want to bang your head against the wall, but for the most part, I would say it's fun because it's Star Wars, and that's another thing, is like, it doesn't feel like work because it's something that we love, and,
Yeah.
and it's just, because we're obviously not going to make a ton of money off this, and we're doing this on our own time,
Hmm.
aside from our regular jobs or whatever, but it's labors of love. And
Yeah.
I think that comes through in the final work. I think it came through with my book, and I feel like it's going to come through in this book. It's just something, and we're not here to rip off Lucasfilm or anything like that. And it's just, it's all a labor of love, and it's all by fans for fans type thing. And I really feel like Lucasfilm has actually done a good job of letting people be creative in that space with
Yes.
Star Wars stuff, and not go after them and say, you can't do that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I feel like Disney's kind of left Lucasfilm alone to make their own decisions on that as well. I mean, there's been instances where they've kind of gone after people, but I think in something like this, I mean, I honestly had the thought that, like, well, I might get a cease and desist, and then I just stopped selling the book. It's like,
Yeah.
whatever, I
Hmm.
have my copy. But it never happened, and I don't think it would, because it doesn't really, for one, it's kind of a fair use thing because it's a reference book,
Hmm.
and we're not out to make a ton of money, obviously. So I just feel like it's kind of protected in that way, that it is fair use. And again, I think Lucasfilm kind of just lets stuff slide because, for one, they have more money and they'll have know what to do with. But two, I think Lucasfilm has always embraced the fans, from the fan club back when things first started, through now. It's like they know fans are their lifeblood, and they
Mm.
don't want to step on those toes per se.
Mm.
So, within reason, I think Lucasfilm, I mean, obviously I'm probably not even on the radar, but my point being is, like, I've seen them leave a lot of fan projects alone and just let them be for what they are. And I think
Yeah,
that's
they're not
commendable.
damaging in any way to the franchise. That's the thing. When I did my
Yeah.
filmumentaries, I remember when I released Star Wars Begins, I was on the front page of Yahoo, AOL,
Yeah.
all these big websites at the time, and I didn't get any correspondence from them at all, because how's that damaging anything that they've produced? In fact, the biggest response I ever got to my filmumentaries was, "Oh, you've made me want to buy the Blu-ray," which
Yeah.
it's in their favor ultimately. And you know,
Yeah,
we're
totally.
gonna, you know, be very diligent about, you know, referencing where we found this information as well, whether it's a book or a magazine or, you know, a website, or if it's from a call sheet. And you know, people can use this book to see where these materials were found and go and buy those books if they want to. So I
Yeah.
think it all fits within the remit of, you know, fan generated love for the movies.
Yeah, that was one of the things on my book that I regret not doing is keeping better tabs on where I got every piece of information. I have a bibliography in the back of the book, but it's very generalized as far as like, oh, I used Starlog magazine, Starburst magazine, and these websites, and it's very small and very short. Like I didn't
Mm,
um, do every single date as like this was found here, this was found here. And I've had actually people doing other books ask me about certain dates in my book. Well, where did you get this date? Because they want to kind of confirm it and find the source. And I actually have to retrace my steps and go back and be like, where did I find that date? And I usually have a lot of stuff saved in my on my browser and stuff, and I can kind of trace my steps. And I'll usually find it, but that was the one thing I kind of regret after the fact. And I think it was more that I was just trying to get the book done, and I wasn't really thinking about that aspect of it. But after it came out, people would ask me that stuff, and I was like, oh, I should have done that. So I know that we're being very meticulous about like, okay, where did this date come from? Where did we find it? Who said it or whatever. So
hmm
I think that is, because as you're doing these, obviously I'm gonna learn and do better. And I think that's one of the things that if there's one thing I've learned is keep meticulous notes about dates.
Yes.
And I'd never written a book before in terms of before Empire. I'd never, especially a reference book, and I'd read them obviously, and it inspired me like Winsor's book and Alan Arnold's book, Making of
Mhm.
Empire. But it was a learning curve. It was a huge learning curve. Like how do I format this book? What does the layout look like? How many pictures should I use? That kind of thing. What kind of font should I use? So all these things that I was learning, and I had a friend of mine proof the book, and I learned a lot from him about proofing. And then I had somebody else have me proof their book because of all the thing I learned. But it was like this. It was a really cool journey making the book to learn all this stuff beyond just Star Wars, but just to be able to make a book and open me up to other possibilities. I mean, there's another book coming out this day in Star Wars history, and Richard Wolowski is doing that book, and his is a bunch of dates throughout all Star Wars, and it's not real similar to mine, but it's kind of his own thing, but it is like a timeline type book. But he
Mhm.
had me proof his book based on my book, and so that was fun to do too. And that was a thing where, again, it's a labor of love because it's very that book actually took us like a year to proof. At first he was like, oh, this will take a couple months, and I'm just like, okay. And we start doing it, and then all of a sudden it just kind of drags on. You're like, oh, okay. And then a year goes by and you're like, holy crap, man. But it was fine because he's a great guy and I like working with him. But just to have connections with you and connections with Kim Simmons, who is the original Kenner photographer that I've made, and
Mhm.
having Kim Simmons take photos for my book to put in there, was a very cool experience. And so I've made a lot of really cool connections to Star Wars and to people who share that love that I have of Star Wars, like you. And it really, it just all of a sudden I'm not just a nerd in my room, seeking out information. It kind of broadens it. And now that I think other people know that we're doing this book, I mean, we might get information from other people who are
Well, I
like,
was just going to say that very thing. You know, if when I put this podcast out, you know, I have a hardcore of several thousand listeners now, I think. And if you are one of those people that has an item, a piece of correspondence, or a date that you might think is obscure, then by all means get in touch. If you go to filmumentaries.com, there'll be a response box under this episode. So feel free to contact me and Justin via there. And if it's a date that we don't already have, of course we'd be happy to reference you in the book, and you
yeah,
know hopefully you'll see your name in a book. So I think we can open that up to pretty much anyone that wants to contribute. So we're going to go out hunting, but if it comes to us as well, all the
for
better.
sure. Yeah, no, any fans that want to contribute, please bring it on. Just have some sort of proof. Like, don't just pull a date out and say, hey, this happened on this date. And it's like, well, where did you get that? But yeah, no, it's I feel like Star Wars has always been kind of a group effort thing, as far as fans and making things happen. We're not, this isn't our book and we're very meticulous and all this stuff. It's like, definitely if somebody wants to contribute, please, by all means, because we don't have all the information, and not everybody we talk to is going to have all that information. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have like obscure, because like I said, fans are collectors and they will keep this stuff that nobody else has. Like they have this piece of paper, this contract signed by so and so on this date, and nobody else has that or has ever seen it in 40 years. There's plenty of stuff out there like that really, to me, that's the stuff that I love. It's like that little obscure stuff that nobody has, nobody's seen forever, doesn't know it exists really. And to put that in like my book, I didn't have very many of those, but the few ones that I did, I savored that because I was like, oh, this is why I did this, is to like learn all these little obscure dates and stuff. And like I said, they probably don't mean much to most people, but to me, it's exciting,
Yeah,
And
I
I'm sure
think,
there's other fans that it is too.
and I think it's important what you said there, and you said it earlier as well about, you're doing this, you did your Empire book for you, we're doing this for us, ultimately, this book. But as I found out with my Filmumentaries and my podcast, there's plenty of us out there, so sure. Hopefully we will get an appreciation from the people that do buy the book. So we should reiterate at this point then that the book is announced today, May the 25th, 2022. It will be released May the 25th, 2023. Crazy to think that it's been 40 years that Return of the Jedi has been in our lives, but it is true, sadly. And the book will be available on Amazon, so it'll be available around the world to anyone that might want to buy it. Yep. And we'll post the kind of draft version of the cover on social media to go along with this, as well as on the show notes. And then we'll, of course, keep you updated with any developments on the book over time. And like I said, do get in touch if you have anything you want to add. And in the meantime, please share this information amongst your group, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of the social media outlets. Do share it, because it relies on all of us working together as a team to get this kind of stuff out to each other. So definitely, yeah, nice one.
I wanted to ask you, Jamie, real quick, like what are your fond memories of seeing Return of the Jedi in a theater as a kid? Like that whole time frame when you first saw Jedi, like what were your thoughts?
Well, I remember going up to London to see it. It was my birthday. I was with my mum and dad, my sister, my cousins, and I remember going to Hamley's First, the big famous toy shop there. And I remember seeing for the first time some of the characters. I remember flipping the back over and seeing the blacked out. Oh, who are these blacked out characters? There were the Ewoks, of course. Yeah. I remember my cousin, who was a couple of years younger than me, getting freaked out by Bib Fortuna. She didn't like the look of him, so she was crying all the way to the cinema. Oh, we went to the Dominion Theatre, and I remember sitting there next to my cousin Steve, who was a couple of years older than me. And I can even remember there was a commercial for Weetabix before the film. Like this is burnt in my memory for some reason. And I remember even in those days, there would be somebody walking around selling like snacks and even toffee apples and things like that in the UK we had here. And they with a tray and a light on the tray so you could see them. And there was a real buzz in the cinema. And I remember the crawl going up the screen and just being totally locked into this world. I was completely immersed in the toys at the time. I'd seen Star Wars, I'd seen Empire. Empire was actually the first movie I ever saw. I wasn't necessarily aware of there being an arc, a story arc throughout the three films. I think it was just the imagery and the sound and everything else. And I came away with memories, really strong memories of Jabba the Hutt, of the speeder bikes, and also of the Scout Walker, the ATST, wobbling and falling over on the logs. I remember telling my grandparents about that. And my cousin and I kind of begged our parents could we see it again, and they said no, we've just paid a huge amount of money for these London tickets, that's not going to happen. And I remember kind of going afterwards and sitting in a park and looking at the figures that I bought, and some of them were from the movie, and just kind of trying to relive it in our heads. And actually on the way out in the foyer, my mum said to my sister and I, you could buy a book. There was a stand with some books there, and one of them was the red magazine kind of style storybook. One of them was the white again, magazine book about the making of. My sister bought the making of one. I bought the story one. And then on the way home on the train, we kind of swapped books, and
Yeah.
I became utterly transfixed with the making of the movie. I saw the matte paintings of people I've now interviewed. I saw the sketches of Nilo Rodis, who I've now interviewed. And that was the moment, I think, that I was turned on to the idea that, movies don't just arrive in a theater, they are created. There are people behind this, and that's what set me on this journey, which I'm still on today, really. So I do have a huge affection for Return of the Jedi. A couple of years ago, it was my birthday, and my kids, who don't really watch Star Wars, they saw the new ones, but they don't really watch the old ones. They said, "Oh, today, Dad, you can watch any any Star Wars movie that you want to watch." And I looked at them and I thought, we're going to watch Return of the Jedi, because I think it's a kind of family friendly Star Wars movie. I think it's it's the gateway drug Star Wars movie, I think, for families. You get them hooked on the cuteness and the monsters and the Muppet kind of style characters. And they enjoyed it. And I have to say, it was the original edition, not the special edition, which I'm not so much a fan of, but will be mentioned in the book. Yes. Maybe just in a different font. And there you go. But yeah, I just have really strong memories of that time. And I kind of remember growing out of Star Wars, some years later, when the figures were, on the bargain peg for 59p, and I was going to like yard sales, and all you saw was Star Wars toys everywhere. People, my generation was getting rid of their toys, and but like you, it came round and got me again in my late teens, and then in my 20s, and here still in my mid 40s. I still love that movie. I don't get to watch it these days. I haven't watched it in a few years, but returning to Jedi was kind of my homage to that movie and my love letter to that movie, and this book will be an extension of that, I think.
It's interesting because that making of book that you're talking, the magazine, I bought that as well, and that really motivated my love of making of movies. And I remember after that, I bought like the Goonies making of book, and because I know Joe Dante and Spielberg and all those guys and Lucas, they always made these magazines that had a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And I just loved that stuff. I loved how these movies were made. And I was a kid, I had my parents' camcorder, and my friends that have camcorders, and we would make our own movies and do stuff. And I had a camcorder that I could dub sound over video. So I could record from one VCR to this one, and then I could overdub sound. So I would make my own little mini music videos and stuff like that. And I got really into film editing early on. I was probably like 10 years old, 10, 12. And my dad bought us a camcorder, and I was the one who used it all the time. Nobody else really cared that much. I always had that thing on, and I was filming things, and I still have that camcorder, actually. It's kind of cool. But same thing with me, is like behind the scenes fascinated me, how they made these movies, and seeing all the behind the scenes, like from Star Wars to Jedi, the special that came out on PBS. That's still, to me, is like one of my favorite behind the scenes documentaries. And just, there's so much going on in Return of the Jedi, because obviously Star Wars and Empire, there's a lot too, but Jedi, they just amped it up. So many monsters in Jabba's palace, and then you've got Ewoks, and new biker scouts, and all this stuff, and they just took it to another level. And just seeing how they did a lot of that, really inspiring. And I was just like, people did this, like these guys are just people like me, and it's like, why can't I do stuff like that? So I started like really getting into the behind the scenes stuff, and that I think is part of why I did my book, and why I loved your stuff, because I gravitate towards the making of things. I always have, and it always fascinates me, even to this day. I always want to see, like Disney Plus is doing the gallery stuff, which is always showing the behind the scenes making of all these things, which I'm so glad that they do. But it just fascinates me. And it's interesting because you'll watch an episode of The Mandalorian or whatever, and you're watching it, and then I still have that piece of my brain that's like, how did they do that shot? Is that green screen? Is that volume? Is that a miniature? And then when you see how they actually did it, it kind of blows your mind sometimes. You're like, oh wow, that was like a stop motion miniature, and you thought it was CGI and just stuff like that. So it's really cool to learn the tricks of the trade, so to speak, and just see the creative process behind it, and I just love that stuff. So um I'll, I know we're getting going on time, but I would say my final thing about Jedi is just, it's not my favorite Star Wars movie, but there's a magic to it because it is the end of the trilogy. And I remember as a kid, I loved the Ewoks. Everybody trashes the Ewoks, but I mean, they're fine. They take down the Empire. I mean, they're these vicious little furry creatures. I mean, they're just, there's a an affinity I have for them. I think because I was a kid. There's the scene in Jedi. I remember being in the theater where the Ewok. I think it's the scene where the Ewok hang glider crashes,
Mm.
and or there's an explosion or something, and one of the Ewoks dies. And then his
Yes.
buddy gets up, goes over to him, and he shakes him, and he realizes he's dead. And then he has this soft moment where he kind of like cries or something. And I
Mm.
remember as a kid that really affected me. Like that, I was just in the theater. I think I cried as a kid, and that scene is very prominent. But I always like that about Star Wars too. Is there's always these little moments like that,
Yeah.
whether it's the creature outside of Jabba's palace who uses his tongue to catch the thing scurrying by, or the scenes like the Ewok, these little short, tiny, intimate moments in that universe that has nothing to do really with the rest of the story, but
Hmm.
it makes you feel like that world's alive. It's very Jim Henson in that way, I
Yeah.
think.
The other one that jumps out at me is of course, when the Rancor dies and we see, this hideous
Yeah,
beast
yeah.
die, and then the Rancor keeper starts weeping. I remember my parents talking about that when we came back from London that first time we saw it, and telling their parents, and because you just didn't see that in movies. You didn't see the
Yep,
baddies kind of emote, and I think,
exactly.
or creatures emote in the case of the Ewok. So I think, Return of the Jedi should be kind of recognized for sort of moving things on a little bit as well from Empire. As you say, they ramped things up,
Yeah.
and it does get a bit of a bad press, but yeah, I think I'll love it forever, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's some moments that are a little cringy, like
Yeah.
Chewbacca doing the Tarzan yell as he's swinging on a vine.
Yeah.
I think even as a kid, I was like, I don't know if that really fits. But just little things like that were kind of like really kind of like jolted me out of that reality. But it's fun, and I get Lucas. There was a lot going on. He wanted to manufacture toys, blah blah blah. But when you look at the creation process behind Jedi, it doesn't come across to me as like, oh, they're just doing this to make toys.
Mm.
Like there was actually a lot of thought behind, Joe Johnston designing Ewoks and what they would actually look like, and then just the elaborate sets of like Jabba's palace and then the Sarlacc and stuff. So it's, a lot of people just kind of throw it under the bus and say, oh, Lucas just wanted to sell toys. And it's like, well, of course, but at the same time, there was a lot that went into making that movie, and a lot of
Mm.
design choices and a lot of, set building and a lot of money spent to make a really elaborate movie.
And a lot of
And
pressure on them as well to kind of,
yeah,
better the previous two.
yeah, for
This, for all
sure.
intents and purposes, as far as we knew, this was the end of Star Wars. It had to be a big
Yeah.
big finale. And okay, there was another Death Star. Okay, they were reusing and regurgitating some of the ideas, but yeah, I think it's a great finale, actually. And there's something really satisfying about seeing all your heroes come back together, and that's the ending. They didn't have to go down a dark path and start killing people off left, right, and center. I kind of like that it's light, and it's fluffy.
Yeah.
We need those things in life as well as the dark.
No, the end celebration scene is really a great moment where you have all of our heroes are there. They're celebrating, they're happy. Luke, sees his father, Anakin, and it's just, it's like you said, it's the end of a saga at that time because we didn't think there'd be any more Star Wars. And so it's a great wrap up. And honestly, like the stuff between Luke and Vader is really Shakespearean and extremely, in my opinion, very profound
Hmm.
stuff going on character wise. And it's like, yeah, you have the cute, fluffy Ewoks on the one hand, it's kind of this corny, taken down at, but then you cut back to the Death Star and you have Luke just like torn between like, falling to the dark side, saving his sister, killing his father. It's like there's so much going on there emotionally for Luke that it's this really crazy contrast between like, hey, Ewoks are toppling ATSTs and they're hitting people in the head and they're doing all this funny stuff. Then you're cutting back to Luke, who's like in the corner and there's like light here and dark here, and he's just like tormented. You're just like, whoa. And when you look at it as an adult through that lens, there's a lot of extremes in that movie. And it just, I felt like Lucas wanted to give, he wanted to give the Luke Vader thing its due and make that intense and, I guess for a kid a little scary. But I feel like he also wanted to make it for kids and say, look, we're still going to have fun. We're still going to have, the Ewoks and Chewbacca and all this stuff that originally brought kids into Star Wars and 3PO and R2. But I still feel like if you watch that movie now as an adult, you realize he still paid off the Luke Vader thing very well. I thought that was just fantastic the way he did it. The Luke Leia sister thing was a little bit of a stretch, I thought, but I'll let it slide. Because when I was a kid, I thought it was great. I was like, oh, that's awesome. But yeah, I think revisiting that movie as an adult, I kind of appreciate it more. Whereas for a while, I was like, oh, the Ewoks, and kind of just went along with everybody else.
It's too easy to say that, wasn't it? Yeah, it was kind of too easy just to point the finger. But the thing is, these films get blamed for the kind of plethora of films that came out, these big blockbusters that tried to match the box office. They get blamed for starting that trend. But actually, you look at them and we're still talking about them, these 4 decades later. I mean, Star Wars is closing in on 50 years. And we're still going to be talking about it then. Disney Plus is still strewn with all of this stuff. And to me, it just highlights actually how bloody difficult it is to make a movie that good, because those people were at the top of their game. They had all the pressure on them in the world, and they still managed to pull it off. So, I still salute what they did for Return of the Jedi.
And it looks good. Those movies look great.
They really
do. Special
do.
Effects, like sure, you've got stuff like, the matte boxes around TIE fighters and stuff, whatever. I mean, as a kid, I never noticed that stuff, but I mean, it's just par for the course of the technology at the time. But when you've got the scene of the Millennium Falcon and it's in the Death Star 2 battle and it flies through this swarm of TIE interceptors and TIE fighters going past the cockpit, that scene has always to me been one of the most amazing scenes I've ever seen put on film, where it's so well done and it's just so crazy, like so much going on. And they did that in like 82 and you're just like, wow, like, I don't know. It's just,
masters of the technology that was available, really. They and had an amazing kind of aesthetic understanding of what would work on the screen. Some of those shots, they're kind of baffling, those 2 or 3 second shots with the TIE fighters and ships everywhere. But those special effects VFX people were just so able to communicate things to us in such a short space of time and create a spatial awareness as well. You look at other films from 1983, they do not stand up as well as Return of the Jedi does.
For sure, yeah. But even like Spielberg, I mean, like I feel like Lucas and Spielberg they cornered the market on just feel good fantasy, action, fun movies for all ages, like Indiana Jones, even Jaws to an extent, because I mean, Jaws was like the first big blockbuster even before Star Wars. I mean, people loved that movie, and it's kind of a horror movie, but I feel like that was really the impetus of the big blockbuster, and then Spielberg and Lucas just took it to a whole nother level with Star Wars and Indiana Jones and E.T. And it's like those movies are really timeless in a way because we watch them. Sure, there's things that are dated, but the stories are so good. And it's like, and I know we probably have an affinity towards them because we watch them, and you show them to kids now and kids are like, that looks fake, type stuff. But I don't know. I still think those movies really hold up well. Because like you said, you look at other movies from that same time period, and they obviously didn't have the budgets that Star Wars and all that had, or Return of the Jedi. But still, they don't hold up as well, either story-wise or special effects-wise. Like, there's always something that really takes you out of it. But when I'm watching, like, Empire Strikes Back, I mean, that movie to me is flawless.
Yeah.
Like, sure, you could nitpick little things here and there, but I mean, it's just, to me, that movie holds up so well. It's so well done. It has everything you'd want in a movie. It's hard for me to think of another movie made even today that compares to that movie. And again, it could be a nostalgia thing, but it's such a well done movie that I don't think it is. I think it's just the fact that it's a really good movie.
Yeah,
So.
I was thinking of 1983. I haven't revisited Krull much. I haven't revisited Superman 3 or Space
Yeah, those
Hunter
aren't very
Adventures
good.
from the Forbidden Zone. And I don't think I ever resaw BMX Bandits either, which came out the same year. And they
I don't
certainly
think I saw
look
that
their
movie.
age.
I don't think I saw BMX Bandits.
I think it had Nicole Kidman in it. I think. Yeah, very young Nicole Kidman. Anyway, yeah, I think you and I'm sure we will at some point talk for many, many hours about these movies. And, I enjoy the fact that we're taking this energy and putting it into something that we want to see, and
For sure.
hopefully other people want to see as well. So, no, it's good to chat to you, Justin, and good to share our enthusiasm. And hopefully people will like the book. Me too. I'm excited too.
I'm excited about the book, and I can't wait for people to have it in their hands. So give us a year and we will bring you a book.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our chat about Episode 6, the third Star Wars movie to be released, a childhood favourite of mine, and now the subject of our book, Return of the Jedi, Unauthorized Timeline 1976 to 2023. As I said in the conversation there, please do get in touch if you have a piece of correspondence or a date that you think should be included. If it's a date we don't already have, provided you have the evidence to back it up, you will of course be credited. Because of the nature of self-publishing on Amazon, we can't take pre-orders, unfortunately. But don't worry, I will be reminding you about the book's release in a year's time. Meanwhile, you can buy Justin's Empire book, and I'll leave a link for that in the show notes. I think it's really important to support these kind of fan endeavours. This is work we're doing on the side. We're not going to make a great deal of money from it, if any, but we enjoy, creating these things. In my case, the podcast and the videos and the Filmumentaries and everything else. And it's nice to join up with Justin and kind of share that passion that we have for these movies and create something that will, last forever. Next I have either composer Daniel Pemberton. We're still trying to find a date, but we are pretty much in constant correspondence trying to pin down when is good for both of us. Or I may have animator T. Dan Hofstede. Now look him up on IMDb and you'll see he's been involved in some very big movies. I'm quite excited about both of these. A big thanks to Michael Hewitt-Brown of MB Music, that's EMBE music.co.uk, for the podcast theme. Give Mike a shout if you want music for your project. He's a great guy, he's a friend of mine, and he's a wonderful collaborator. He really does listen to what you want and comes forward with some great suggestions as well. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.